I loved reading everybody's stories. And so I asked people's permission to share their stories on the podcast as a way to invite all of the Patchwork Revival listeners into a broader quilting community. Hey y'all, I'm Emily, an almost lifelong quilter with a lot of stories to tell. I have loved quilts and talking about them for as long as I can remember, and I'm here to celebrate the tradition of quilting with you. From family heirlooms to thrift store finds, every quilt holds a piece of history and a little piece of a quilter's heart. Join me every other week to get back to your quilting roots. We'll celebrate quilts and the real people who made them, learn a little bit about the history of quilting, and have lots of fun exploring ways to reclaim tradition in a modern world. I'm so glad you're joining me this week here at Patchwork Revival. Welcome to Patchwork Revival. I am your podcast host, Emily. Welcome to 2026. We are here in my studio. It's very messy. I still have yet to clean up from my December making marathon. I actually didn't make many quilts for Christmas gifts for this year or quilted projects. I made a couple of little stuffed dolls, actually, and I enjoyed that. Then I got totally distracted by trying to replicate a historical quilt that I saw in a book. Not really copy it, but just sort of make my own spin on it, and I think it's so fun. I'm going to share about that later because I've had a lot of fun with it, and I think you guys will like it too. 2026, I hope, will help me find some more sewing time, and by that I mean more than like 20 minutes at a time. 2025 was a little bit hard from that perspective for me. I had a new baby. I was working. Obviously, we moved. And when I really start putting that all together, it was a lot. And part of all of that busyness and all of that change in my life meant some change to my quilting practice, to my ability to sort of engage in the quilting community. And I had to kind of evolve. So this episode, I'm going to share a little bit about that, but I'm also going to share stories from my 2025 quilting community. At the beginning of the podcast, back in 2024, I talked a lot about being able to engage in my local quilt community. There's a quilt club that meets in my town about once a month. I really, really enjoyed going to that. I kind of forced myself to just put myself out there, prioritize that, taking time to do that. And I loved it. It was fabulous, fantastic. I actually miss being able to go. And I'm really hoping in 2026 I'll be able to jump back into that because it was very meaningful for me, stretched me creatively, just gave me an appreciation for even the sheer amount of quilters of all different kinds, all different experience levels, all different ages, all different styles that are just all around me right here in my small little Texas town. 2025 came around, and I actually, for the first half of the year, it seemed like every single evening when the quilt club was meeting, I was working late or on call. I just had schedule conflicts every single time for like 4 or 5 meetings. It was ridiculous. Then I was pregnant. My first trimester was pretty rough. Just really sick, tired, exhausted. I was also having to work a fair amount. Not having to, I chose to. And I just really underestimated what a physical toll that was taking on me. And emotional, because I find that when I'm working really hard, really intensively, it's a little bit harder to prioritize time for myself because I feel like that's just more time that I'm taking away from my family. So life just shifts. Priorities just shift. And I figured out a way to evolve and to sort of adapt to what I had going on last year. So I did find a fabulous quilting community, and I really did that just by leaning into my community that I already had online. So, those of you who listen to the podcast know I am part of a group of designers that call ourselves the Nine Patch Quilt Collective. Every year, we host a sweater weather sampler. It's a sew along featuring fall designs, and the sew along runs from September through the end of November. Basically, every year. We've done this 3 years now. We do have plans for 2026, so get excited about that. But although our sew along is active during just those 3 months, we are friends who interact with each other, check in on each other, share each other's design ideas, our projects. We test each other's patterns sometimes, just overall cheer each other on. We are from all over the country. We have folks in Wisconsin, Texas, Utah, Minnesota, Colorado. Can't forget Colorado. And so we've all kept up with each other, checked in on each other, and we have our sort of circle that we quilt with. I would call it our sort of just general quilting circle, friendship circle, all the things. It's a very multifaceted circle. So I really leaned into that, and that was, thank goodness, because once you've started sewing and quilting and getting to know other people, it gets a little bit harder to do it just by yourself. So I also really, really enjoyed the community aspect of the Sweater Weather Sew Along this year. We host a group. Historically, it's been on Facebook. And we just shared a couple prompts just to try to get people talking, get people sharing their story, get people knowing each other. And I found it really fascinating, really interesting. I loved reading everybody's stories. And so I asked people's permission to share their stories on the podcast as a way to invite all of the Patchwork Revival listeners into a broader quilting community. Community is very important. I share about this on basically every episode of the podcast. My whole intent behind creating this podcast was to create a sense of community, a warm welcome for any quilter of any age, any generation, any skill level. Really, even if you're not a quilter and you're just interested, you're welcome here. And I want to communicate that. So this episode, this first episode, I'm going to just slow down and I'm going to just share stories that you all have shared with me. I think this is going to have to be a 2-part episode. People were incredible about sharing their stories. So I have a lot. And I actually love it because I want to be able to take our time going through these stories. I hope that sharing these stories will inspire you to see yourself in some of these situations, to imagine ways that you can invite other quilters into your practice, that you can put yourself out there, start a community, even a virtual sew along. We had some people share how they sort of kept up with the blocks and sewing together, even from a distance. Technology is a little bit scary sometimes, but it's also really incredible sometimes. So I loved hearing these stories. I hope you'll love them too. And without further ado, let's jump into episode 1 of 2026 of the Patchwork Revival Podcast. I hope you're cozy. I'm cozy. I actually have a cup of hot coffee. Coffee is my comfort drink of choice. Take a moment, slow down, be ready to just absorb, and let's get to know some of our friends. Okay. Carla shares, I actually learned to sew on my grandma's lap with her beautiful Sears and Roebuck machine in the late 1950s. From there, I had home economics in junior high. I sewed all of my mother's nursing uniforms until I got married and left home. I got into knitting and crocheting and made my son's infant clothes, and I've continued to sew all my life, and I'm a self-taught quilter. I prefer quilting on my Hazel, she's her Juki machine, or hand quilting. I have a stack of quilt tops that I need to quilt. My son has helped me fix up my basement sewing room for Sweater Weather Sew Along. Now I can even quilt my make this year. That sounds so awesome, Carla. Thanks for sharing your story. And whenever you finish your sweater weather quilt top into a finished quilt, I totally want to see it. I want to see it at any stage. Thank you for sharing. Sherry says, I don't call myself a teacher, but I have done some teaching of quilting. My mom has always been a good quilter, and years ago she said to me, if I were your age, I would buy a long arm. I did, and I've been a long arm quilter since 2013. And Sherry shares that her long arming business is called Sea Glass Quilting. I'm going to check that out, Sherry. Thanks for shouting out your business, and thanks for sharing your story with us. Laurel says, my quilting buddy, and she shares a picture of her adorable little studio dog. He's posing with a quilt. It looks so cute because it looks like he's quality control. Okay, so Laurel says, I always have to wash and dry my gifted quilts because not everyone wants dog hair on them. I come from a long line of seamstresses and quilters. My great aunt gave me my featherweight almost 60 years ago, and I used that machine for years. I now have a lovely Bernina, which is smarter than I am. My mom and great aunt taught me to sew my own clothes at an early age. My paternal Texas grandmother was a quilter. After my fourth child was born, I joined a quilting guild in Massachusetts to learn how to quilt. I took a few classes and learned from my quilting bee friends. That's so cool. I love to do handwork. I hand quilt and machine quilt my smaller items, but send out my larger quilts to be long-armed. My quilting girlfriends in Massachusetts and New Hampshire have been some of my dearest friends, and I'm thankful for my quilting communities. I'm super thankful for my quilting communities too, Laurel. I love that you shared the way that you branched out and found some community right in your backyard. So thanks for sharing your story. Cindy says, I am a self-taught quilter. I started in about 2005. I had worked with some ladies in a quilt shop a block away. I don't have any known quilters in the family. I quilt my own quilts on my Juki 2010Q, just basic meandering and wavy lines. Well, we always are so quick to dismiss our skills that way and say it's just a meander or just wavy lines. But you know what? It's also just finishing a quilt that you can use and turn into an heirloom. So awesome work, Cindy. My quilt buddy is Pumpkin. As soon as she hears the machine going, she assumes the position. Then she inspects the quilts after they are finished, and we have another photo of an adorable sewing room fur baby. Okay. I'm going to share Leslie's story. Leslie says, I come from a long line of quilters. It skipped my mom. She never picked up any hobbies my grandmother did. No knitting, quilting, baking, etc. So my only sewing lessons were in home ec class of 8th grade. We had to make a log cabin quilt, baby-sized. I made it blue and saved it, and my firstborn son had it on his crib, and I still have it. That is the sweetest thing. I love that. I would love to see a picture of that quilt. My first machine was replaced about 9 years ago. I was newly married and I had decided to start quilting again, but not much money for a sewing machine. I got one for $99 from JCPenney's, and that lasted over 30 years. I love that because it's such a great picture of just starting where you are. And look where it took you. So Leslie goes on, I took a break from quilting, but picked it back up heavily about 12 years ago. Now I own a brother, just a basic. I do have a quilting foot, but when I tried it, it was a mess, so long armor it is. Absolutely, do what works for you. I don't have a real story for my quilts, but I have quilts from my grandma's. One is a double wedding ring, all done by hand with scraps over the course of years. It was a quilt in which she embroidered blocks with pictures my siblings and I drew as kindergartners, surrounded by an Irish chain. An Irish chain that's scrappy, blocked with fabric from my entire childhood, from dresses she made me, cottage curtains, things she made my mom, other quilts given to us. Oh, and she had made one when she was 13. It's a drunkard's path. I have the remains of a crazy quilt my great-grandmother made as a young girl, dated in the 1800s. Those are so cool, and I love that they highlight the connection we have with quilters from our past and our future. Like Leslie's story is so incredible because she talks about how as an 8th grader, she made a quilt that she just kept, and now her firstborn son had that quilt as his baby quilt. You just never know. Let's see. Leslie had a little bit more to share later. So she says, what keeps me coming back to quilting? It's the enjoyment of creating something, taking ordinary colors of fabrics and turning them into art. The community has been the most inspiring and helpful. You meet online, and the day you cross paths in person, it's like family. I've been organizing a donation quilt every year for Rett syndrome, and I get daisy blocks from all over. Everyone is so willing to help. I love that, Leslie. One day I'm going to have to find out some more about raffle quilts or quilts for a cause, like you mentioned your quilts for Rett syndrome that you make. I love that, and I love the idea of a community quilt, a community coming together to make a quilt for a special cause, a special purpose, a special person. So, Leslie, that was an awesome story. It was very thorough. Thank you for sharing all those different parts of your quilting journey. Okay, Camille shares with us, and she kind of breaks this down by some of the questions that we asked on the Facebook group. So she says, our first question was, did anybody teach you how to quilt? Camille says, no, I grew up around quilters, my great-grandmothers and my Nana, but I'm 100% self-taught off YouTube videos and such. YouTube is an incredible resource. I started in 2012 by making a massive, ugly, king-sized monstrosity for my then boyfriend to take to Montana with him. I then made a handful of quilts for family before I got distracted by life. I mostly paused for about 10 years, then dabbled a bit for 2 more. I think I finished maybe 3 projects during those years. I really picked it back up last fall and have been unstoppable since. I've finished 14 quilts since last September with 5 more on the go to finish before I visit family in November. We also asked, what sewing machine do you use? Camille said, I use a Singer Patchwork for piecing and a Little Rebel for quilting on a 10-foot frame. Trying to master free motion before I add rulers. I think it's awesome. That is so cool. Do you quilt on your domestic machine or hire a long arm quilter? Camille says, I've never hired a long armer. Now I am my long armer. I'm just not very good at it yet. Before getting my Little Rebel last year, I would just ditch stitch all my quilts, though I did free motion once on a domestic machine for my mom many years ago. That was a nightmare. I'm excited to start this sampler, but I think I'm going to have to fall behind for a more dramatic victory because I have to finish the family quilts first. I'm hoping to give this completed sampler to my grandma-in-law next September, so I have plenty of time. You totally have plenty of time. Quilting deadlines sometimes seem so arbitrary, and I really hope that you are just enjoying the process of finishing all those quilts, Camille. It sounds like you are learning a lot and trying a lot of new things, and I love that. Okay, Joni shares her story. My sister and I were bored and were looking for something fun to do to meet new people. My sister saw an article in the newspaper about a quilt store opening soon in our town. We took our first class and got hooked. We made friends and we made quilts. I've been quilting for 26 years. When my kids were younger in the summer, I taught them to quilt too. Now my daughter has taught some of her college friends to quilt. I love quilting because it opens up the creative part in me. Same here, Joni. It's relaxing and fun. Now I mostly quilt with my sister-in-law, Leanne. We laugh a lot, and yes, even after so many years of quilting, we still do a lot of reverse sewing. Same. We are looking forward to Thursday night. We're going to FaceTime while making our blocks. She lives about 2.5 hours away from me. This will be our first time to try and FaceTime so we can sew together. That is super fun. I hope it was a great sewing session, Joni, and I would love to hear about it. Thanks for sharing. I think that's such a great idea. FaceTime is something that's so accessible to us. If we have an iPhone especially, what a great idea to just invite someone to sit and sew with you via FaceTime. Jamie shares her story. My sister Jenny taught me to quilt in 2001 or maybe 2002. Our mom sewed and so did we, but quilting was new for us. My first quilt was done on my Kenmore that I got as a teen, but I've since made my way through several Husqvarnas to my current year-old brilliance. In Texas, I rented a long arm in my favorite quilt shop. After much searching here in Denmark, I found a creative co-op where I can rent their long arm. I don't really have any stories about my quilts, but I do have several dogs who insist on being in a specific satellite chair when I am in my sewing room. I never sit in this chair, but it was imperative that I bring it across the Atlantic so they would have it. They race each other when I open the door, and the losing dog sometimes runs outside, barks like we're being invaded, then runs in to steal the chair when the other dog leaves it to check out their barking. That's so cute. Dogs are crazy. I love them. Thanks for sharing your story, Jamie. And thanks for sewing along with us. Sperry shares a little line or two. She says, I started quilting in 2002 to bond with my soon-to-be mother-in-law. She taught me on a Viking, and I got my first quilt done before her son and I married. I've been sewing with her for 23 years now. I love it. That's such a sweet thing. Quilting is definitely a love language, and when you find a shared bond through that, it's something really special. That's such a cool story. Natalie says, I started quilting just a few months ago, and my lovely mom has taught me all the things. I use her old brother's sewing machine and love it. I've made 3 quilts, 1 for my daughter and 2 for my stepdaughters. She also includes a picture of her first quilt for her 22-year-old daughter. It's so beautiful. My favorite thing about quilting is that my amazing dog snuggles in my chair, squeezed in behind me. I've definitely caught the bug. I love how many of us have our little furry friends sewing with us. Quilting is cozy for them too, so I love that. Tanya shares a funny story from last year's sweater weather. For the sun block, I'm pretty sure she's talking about the Sunstill block by Anne of Crafty Miss Quilts. It was such a cool block. So she says, I was FaceTiming my parents and showing them how it looked. My dad says in the background, you made a mistake. And I said, no, I didn't. Fast forward a few minutes, we hang up, I'm looking at it, and sure enough, I had made a mistake and flipped one of the blocks. I called my dad and said, you were right. It turns out my dad had never even looked at it and had just been joking. So we got a good laugh out of that. That's really funny. I also think it's really interesting how our brains sometimes just don't see mistakes until we have stepped back a little bit and like hung it up on the wall and looked at it, or taken a picture of it, and then you're looking at the photo and your brain processes things differently, and you can notice, oh, dang, I switched that up, or I flipped that unit, or I made an entire block wrong. I actually, in my first quilt, have a block where it's like one of the units is turned completely backwards. And I made that quilt when I was probably like 10 to 12 years old or something. And I just noticed it probably 4 or 5 years ago. So there you go. We all make mistakes, right? Oh, Christy shares a story. My first quilt was a request from my daughter for a t-shirt quilt of her Rascal Flatts concert shirts. I realized I enjoyed it. Then I found out my dog friends, she has Vishlas, and it sounds like probably gets together with her friends who also have Vishlas, quilted. So off started my journey. I need to still understand the color wheel, but I'm getting better. Christy, use whatever colors you want. Or learn the color wheel. Some people learn that way. I have tried so hard to integrate knowledge of color and things like that, but I swear my brain just sees things differently. And I find that if I just kind of let it go and find what I like, I have more fun that way. But I love that you're learning, Christy. I also love that you found sort of a 2-in-1 community with your puppy dogs and your quilting. Pretty cool. Our friend Martina shares. Martina is amazing. She has been an OG sweater weather sewer. So I remember Martina from 2023's sweater weather sampler. That was our sort of inaugural foray into hosting a sew along together. And Martina was one of many, many quilters from Germany who somehow saw our sew along and joined in. We were shocked that there were people from around the globe wanting to participate and sew with us. So Martina, you will always have a special place in our hearts because we just remember you and how active you were with a lot of your other quilting friends in the Sweater Weather Sampler. Martina shares, I love your podcast. It's so interesting, especially the one about sweater weather and how it all started. I was so proud that you mentioned our German sweater weather sampler exhibition last year. And by the way, it's the best way to learn better English. Two things. First off, now I feel a small amount of pressure to make sure I'm using proper English, and also recognizing that is not going to happen because I am who I am, and I am from the South, specifically Texas, and we just have our own way of speaking down here. Also, the sweater weather sampler exhibition. So this group of quilters that I mentioned from Germany got together. They did the sweater weather sampler sort of together, encouraged each other, helped translate because we had no idea how to translate any of our instructions. And so we worked with some of the folks to help, try to make sure everything we did translated to the things that they needed. And Martina and a group of quilters finished their 2023 sweater weather samplers and then had a community exhibition. So they hung their finished quilts up in this incredible building where each quilt was showcased. People could come in, look at it. It was so cool and so incredible to see. It was all the same quilt, but so many different styles. People finished differently. It was really cool, and it just really inspired us and made us realize that the community we have sort of cultivated and grown and felt really proud of can even kind of spin off and make its own smaller communities, help bring quilting to different places. And I love that. So I think we're going to stop there for part 1. I do want to invite you as a listener, if you want to share your story and sort of introduce yourself to the Patchwork Revival community, I would love to share that. Just go ahead and send me an email. I have a new email address. It is hello@patchworkrevivalstudios.com. Send your email in, share your story, share about your quilting community. I would love to hear all things about your quilting journey if you would like to share with me. Thank you guys for listening. Be sure to stay tuned for part 2. Our next episode is going to drop in 2 weeks, and actually it is going to feature a very special friend who is going to share about a new project that she has in the works. So be sure to tune in. Go ahead and follow the podcast so that you stay updated on any new episodes the minute that they drop. You can also like the podcast and leave a review. That would mean so much to me because that's sort of the way that other people can get introduced to the podcast. Also share it with a friend if you found something meaningful. If you recognize any of your friends in the stories that we shared, be sure that they know to listen in. Thank you guys so much for being here. We'll see you next time. Well, that's it for this episode of Patchwork Revival. I loved having you here with me talking all things quilty. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and leave a rave review. Also, be sure to jump down to the show notes to find links for this episode, as well as the link to my shop where you can enjoy 15% off as a podcast listener with code REVIVAL. Remember that the Patchwork Revival Podcast is here to celebrate the connection made in the quilts we love. I'll see you next time.